Welcome to the Feds, insiders bringing accountability, integrity, and reform to a broken bureaucracy. At Feds for Freedom, we value constructive dissent and healthy debate. The views and opinions shared in today's episode are those of the speaker alone and do not express the views or opinions of the U.S. government or any other employer.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Feds, the official podcast of Feds for Freedom. We are the insiders bringing accountability, integrity, and reform to a broken bureaucracy. Through our podcast, we intend to reach all Americans who are awakened or awakening to the fact that the government has severely overreached into our personal lives and decisions. If you believe in transparency and accountability in government and want to see that come to fruition, this podcast is for you. Here we'll be interviewing many federal employees and contractors who within their agencies and companies fought back against this corruption, abuse of power, and blatant government violation of basic human rights. These employees and contractors demonstrate how to stand for your convictions, even when you think you're standing alone, and even when that comes with a high price. We will be providing tangible tools for citizens, federal employees and contractors to take to their workplaces and communities and to further enact change. In this, our very first podcast, we'll be discussing our mission statement, Insiders Bringing Accountability, Integrity, and Reform to a Broken Bureaucracy. I'm Marcus Thornton, one of your hosts. I'm also the president and co-founder of Feds for Freedom. We're a 501c3 grassroots organization dedicated to bringing desperately needed reforms to the government system. We started in September of 2021 in response to the executive orders mandating COVID vaccinations for federal employees and contractors. And we've seen quite a bit of success in court to date. We're the ones who had the lawsuit that is now at the Supreme Court, which got an injunction against the COVID mandates. And so that's how our fight started. We're going to continue to fight for the freedoms and liberties of all Americans, to reform the government in a way that we make sure that what happened to us over the past 2 years never happens again, not to our generation and not to future generations. With that, I'm joined by Jim Erdman, Demis, and Stephanie, and I will allow each of them to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about them, about how they got involved in this, because you'll be seeing a lot more of all of us moving forward as we host this podcast, along with other hosts as well. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim. Jim, it's great to have you here. Thanks for joining us. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Marcus. I'm a longtime CIA employee who was negatively affected by the vaccine mandate. And so, how did I get involved in the fight? Well, I organized a large group of IC employees to take this to court. And when I tried to take this to court, that's when I met you, Marcus, and we became co-founders of Feds for Medical Freedom, and started the litigation that brought us to the Supreme Court. I think we'd be remiss in saying that we've brought a number of cases to courts across the United States, and those are still ongoing, and they're looking at different aspects of the vaccine mandate, focused on Administrative Procedure Act and employment law. I'll just keep it short for now. We'll have an opportunity to talk more.
Hey guys, my name is Demis. I'm a federal contractor, and I was actually got involved because I was also under a tremendous amount of pressure from these mandates. Basically, contractors kind of get the boot first before anybody else because they're contractors. So we were under a lot of pressure from the company, from the government, from other employees as well. So harassment was top during that time. So basically, you either bend the knee or you fight against the mandates and the pressure coming down, unconstitutional pressure, I would say. At the time, I would talk to other fellow colleagues who were in the same mindset as mine. And we basically put together, and we didn't want to go through the pressure. We didn't want to be forced into doing things. That's where we kind of teamed up with Jim, and Jim teamed up with Marcus. So it's kind of a little chain that we created. And here I am. I'm also the host of Immigrant Corner, where when COVID started, I started that show as well. So here I am, happy to be here, happy to be part of the team.
I am Stephanie Edouard Weidel. I come from a different background from everyone else here. All of my education and experiences in vocal performance, which is singing and opera and acting. Um, but I married a federal employee. And when he came from a background of having a lot of allergies, a lot of medical issues. And so when we had our first child, I noticed that every shot she got, she was a really tough baby anyway, but every shot she got in the childhood vaccine schedule, she got quieter and quieter. And being a really tough child, I having a really tough child, I thought I was actually grateful for having a little bit of respite from that, from the crying there. But I didn't realize that she was probably getting vaccine injured the whole time. So when she got her MMR, and I'm pretty sure she got the DTaP at the same time, and I'm pretty sure a seventh shot on top of it that day, she had a reaction within 3 hours. Turning white, lips blue, eyes rolled back in the head, passing out. And so I started a journey of looking into what is in the shots. And so fast forward to then having our 3 children, we knew that we were not going to continue anymore. And at that point, the vaccine mandate came down for COVID during the COVID time. And we fought back immediately. We joined a lawsuit, which didn't go anywhere because the judge had a conflict of interest. And then we eventually joined Feds for Freedom, and we have greatly benefited for the Feds for Freedom board, and we are very grateful for the organization.
Can I just jump in real quick? Because I think one thing I want to mention before we move on to the next piece we want to cover is when you take a look at the members of Feds for Med Freedom, the board members, this is we've got people who got into this for family. I mean, many people their main purpose was, hey, listen, I've got a family, I've got a young son, and I didn't want him living in a world that was less free or less good than the world I lived in. And then we've got outward-facing agencies and departments, inward-facing agencies and departments, and you'll meet some of the other board members in future podcasts. So what you have here is, I think, a pretty good slice of what Feds for Freedom represents. So
I was thinking that's a great segue into what we're going to be talking about today. So we're talking about our mission statement as an organization and as a podcast. Insiders, bringing accountability, integrity, and reform to a broken bureaucracy. And we're going to take each of those words and analyze them a little bit and ask everyone what their thoughts are on it. So let's start with insiders. Who are we as federal employees and as families of federal employees and contractors? Let's see. Marcus, would you like to start that out after Jim actually gave a great... Go ahead.
That's a great question and a great lead in. I'm who we are at Feds for Freedom is we're a grassroots organization. Like I mentioned earlier, we're a grassroots organization. None of what we do, everything that we've accomplished to date, has been completely funded by our supporters. We don't have corporate donors. We don't have anybody who's backing our organization financially, other than our grassroots supporters. And I just want to make that clear. We're very transparent about our finances. Where we come from and who we are is a grassroots organization of literally thousands of federal employees and contractors in every single state of the United States and the territories, posted in many countries across the globe, on military bases, in American embassies, and serving in just about every corner of the government, every agency, every department. And on the contracting side, in dozens of different companies that work hand in hand with their counterparts in the civil service and the federal service to promote American interests and to keep Americans safe day in and day out. This whole organization started with Jim and I and a couple of others, and it started because we recognized that all of these institutions that historically would protect American values in a situation like this weren't going to stand up for us. And so, if we wanted anything to change, if we wanted to have the freedom to exercise our freedom of religion, to exercise our freedom of speech, we were going to have to stand up ourselves and fight for that. And so we did, and we have. And that decision, those efforts quickly ballooned into a movement of thousands of people. And I feel like I've been so blessed over the last 2 years to get to know those people and to stand side by side with those people. Because we the unions failed us. All of these different entities that usually would have stood up and said, no, you can't force employees or contractors to do this. That's a violation of their constitutional rights. It's a violation of their religious rights. Nobody did that. And so we had to do it ourselves. And we have, and we've been, fairly successful in doing that. But in the process, along the way, we've met thousands of other liberty-minded individuals within the ranks of those who are serving the American people. And our goal is to look at what we came through and to make sure that attempt at overreach, that attempt at violating our rights doesn't happen again. It doesn't happen for us. It doesn't happen for future generations. And that doesn't happen unless we have fundamental reform in the bureaucratic system, which I know we'll get to next. But so that's the insider's piece. I'll let somebody else tackle some of the other pieces of the puzzle. Jim, maybe if you would like to speak to. So we're looking at insiders bringing accountability, integrity, and reform to the government. We want a more fair government. We want freedom, accountability, integrity, and reform. That's what we see as the pieces of the puzzle that need to come together in order to prevent the mandates from coming back. Because those mandates didn't happen in a vacuum. They happened because we have an unelected bureaucracy that does not reflect the values of the average American, of the people that it serves. And we want to get back to that. So with that, let's go over to Jim to talk about the freedom piece.
Just to sum up real quick, the insider piece, I think every American out there really hopes that there's somebody on the inside who reflects the same values they have. And, most of them just want the freedom to be able to make a choice for their community, make a choice regionally, whether it's state or federal. They want to know that somewhere in this giant organization called the federal government, there's people that will be responsive to their needs. And most people, it doesn't matter what side of an argument you may or may not be on. They just want to know at least part of their argument is represented inside the federal government equally, so that everyone has a voice. And I think, if we're talking about freedom, which is it's a broad term. There's all sorts of kinds of freedom, but it all boils down to the constitutional freedoms we've been afforded. So I think that they want to know that there's insiders on the inside saying, hey, listen, some of these things that, folks from the founding fathers on forward have been protecting, there's still people protecting those same values. I hope I answered the question.
In a conversation I had with you, Jim, you said something very clear. You said, if we're going to change the government, we're the best bet to make the change as we work with the leaders. And I think that's important to remember. The insiders are working under the leaders who are making the policies. This is our best bet of change, is the federal employees, the contractors, the people who work for the government, even the families of federal employees, to put ears, put things in their ears is very important.
Also, don't
So,
forget that most of the workers uh, in the office space, they also are subject to abuse and harassment by others who don't have the same mindset. So that also has to get addressed, because what happened was during COVID that was not addressed, because no matter how we pushed back, however much we pushed back, that hey, we don't want this mandate, this is not right, this is uh infringement on our freedom. But what happened was there are worker bees who disagree with you and create a hostile work government, a work environment on your end as well. So there's that piece of it too that nobody really talks about on the federal government level and in office spaces, right? So we do have that big picture that hey, yeah, the mandate's coming down unconstitutional. It's a trickle down mandate, right? So the mandate comes down, goes down to the managers, the chiefs, the micromanagement kicks in, and everybody goes under pressure. But the workers are also under pressure by other workers who don't believe in the same ideas or whatever it is.
yeah.
So being an insider doesn't mean that we're gonna overthrow the government. Being an insider is being bringing out the awareness of what actually happens in these cases. So
Dennis, that's perfect. Yeah, I mean, I think you're hitting that. The point we're trying to make is that, you know, why do we love our jobs? And, I'm going to extend this to the families who are supported by those jobs and love their husbands and wives. I mean, when you boil it all down, your job as a federal government employee is to, uh, particularly for someone like Department of State or where I worked, you search for truth, and your job is to present that truth to policymakers. Those policymakers need that. They need unvarnished truth, or at least the truth that you can find, so that they can make wise decisions with it. And I think this is a guileless effort on our part. There's no ulterior motives other than we are on the inside, and we feel it's our duty to respect truth, to respect, which is a part of integrity, and give that truth to policymakers so that leaders can actually lead effectively. I hope I'm sure there's people more eloquent than I who could say that, but hopefully that came across.
more definitions will come out.
I think both of you, summed it up perfectly. And so, we've talked about who we are as insiders, why we're doing what we're doing, and our goal through this podcast is to bring that story to the public, and as Jim mentioned, to let people know that there are still good people within the government fighting for what the average American believes in, and we hope through our efforts to make the unelected part of the government. Obviously, we have the elected part of the government, which should be reflective of the people that elect those people and put them into office. But then you've got the other part of the government, which is unelected. It's the unelected bureaucracy, and the reality is that bureaucracy today is not reflective of the political diversity of our country. It's not reflective of the ideological diversity of our country. And that's where we end up running into all these issues that we're seeing in terms of like weaponization of the government. You're seeing the government being used for partisan or ideological purposes. And that's not what the founding fathers envisioned. That's not what they intended when they set up our form of government. And that's not how things should function if we want to have a productive, healthy relationship between the government and the people. And so our goal as insiders is to change that. We want to use this podcast as an opportunity to reach others who are in a position to help us change it through legal mechanisms, through the administrative processes, through legislation, through advocacy. There are a lot of different ways that we can affect that change and make it happen. And our goal is to use this podcast to share the stories of those people who are helping make it happen, and to encourage others to join us. We've talked a little bit about freedom and what that means. These are fundamental ideas, constitutional principles, God-given rights that our forefathers have bled and died for, that we've recognized that there are some things that are so crucial, so essential, so fundamental to who we are, that they're worth risking our careers over. And that's exactly what we've done over the past 2 years. All of us, when we joined the ranks of public service, took an oath to stand up for the Constitution and for those rights that our forefathers bled and died for. And we take that oath seriously. We keep our word, and that leads us into the accountability and integrity and reform piece of things. So, Jim, I think because you've headed up our lawfare efforts within the organization over the past couple of years, you're intimately familiar with all the different lawsuits that we've brought against the Biden administration, against various specific agencies and departments in the government. So, tell us a little bit about accountability, what that means for us as an organization, what we've done in terms of accountability, what we plan to do or hope to do in the future, with the help and support of those who are listening in right now.
Sure. Let's break it down into, we'll say, maybe three pieces here. We'll start with the litigation. Litigation is normally a last measure. You don't want to have to go to litigation. You're hoping that the processes that are available to employees within their agencies and departments are sufficient to be able to resolve employee-employer disputes. Unfortunately, in this case, there was a number of lawsuits that we've levied, and I'll start with the one that's most important. That was Boyd and Gray and Associates in the 5th District, and it was focusing on the executive authority to be able to put a sweeping vaccine mandate on the whole of the federal government workforce. To keep this as concise as possible, over the course of when it was originally filed, I believe in December of 2020, since then, we've enjoyed a injunction against the vaccine mandate for pretty much January 2021 through the end of mandates. Now, it's gone to the Supreme Court, and right now we're waiting to see whether or not the Supreme Court will weigh in. And we're confident. We're confident that when all is said and done, the two main pieces of case law that are currently on the books will remain, and hopefully we'll have a final ruling that seals up the merits of the case. Just to real quick on that, the two main points of the litigation that's important for accountability. One, the Fifth Circuit has said in their en banc decision that vaccine mandates are legally defined harm in and of itself. That's important because many of these lawsuits that go forward, they say, well, have you really been harmed? I mean, if you didn't take the shot or you didn't do what they asked you to do, have you been harmed? And so they'll toss those cases out saying, well, wait until after you get fired. Which brings us to the second piece, which is that we have pre-enforcement challenge rights to go to court before exhausting CSRA, or the Civil Service Reform Act procedures. It's hugely important for federal government employees because without that right, you would have thousands and thousands of employees that would have had to have been removed from their position and before they could take something to federal court. Now, I don't, again, I'm going to try and keep this concise because if you pull my string, I'll just keep chatting. But bottom line is that sort of situation would be very deleterious to the national security of our country, to the domestic programs that are ongoing, to a whole assortment of second and third order effects. Two other big lawsuits that have been filed, one was in DC and one was in Florida. Those are still pending, but they focused on the Administrative Procedure Act. And those are cases more focused on employment law. So they're focused on the details related to how the mandate was executed was illegal. And so we've got Feds for Med Freedom members involved in all three of those lawsuits, one in Florida, one in DC, one in Texas. In Texas, Feds for Med Freedom is a named plaintiff. We have RFRA, Religious Freedom Reformation Act lawsuits that are out there now, and I believe we've got three of them. Department of State, is it DHS, Marcus?
Well, so far with the RFRA suits, we have Department of State was the first one. Then we did the Department of Justice. We had a huge group of FBI agents who filed suit against the Department of Justice. And then we have two with Department of Defense. So we've got one against like big Department of Defense, and then one against specifically Department of the Navy.
Right. So those are focusing on some of the violations of religious freedom that occurred during this whole process. And again, we'll have plenty of time to discuss that in future podcasts, but many employees have sincerely held religious beliefs, and many of those beliefs were violated with this vaccine mandate. And
can I just jump in there, Jim,
Please,
and say this is what makes it will make this podcast so unique, in that we will be able to interview many of these federal employees, these whistleblowers, these contractors who saw that accountability needed to be sought after. I mean, we had supervisors saying, well, okay, so you're not vaccinated, you're not going to mask, you're not going to test. Okay, you can't come into work. And on top of that, we're going to put you on unpaid leave, which was in direct violation to the Safer Federal Workforce policies. And there was no one to appeal to. There was no accountability.
One more thing that we're doing is whenever a contract is awarded on the federal government, it has a bunch of requirements and all that stuff. And what happened on the contractor side, this is where integrity kicks in, right? And transparency. This was not disclosed to us from the get-go. You know, in order for the mandates to heavily be pushed on people, what they did was they changed the language on the contracts, requiring the shots being a requirement of employment. So, which means, like, if you're a federal employee, like if you have a clearance, you have to have a certain amount of clearance, X, Y, and Z, in order to apply for a position and actually fill that position, blah, 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 right? So this is not a state secret. This is everybody knows this. This is a open source information. This is not something that's from the inside. But what they didn't tell us when the mandates were coming in, that they actually did change the languages on the contracts, that they put in the requirement as a requirement, meaning if I have a clearance, I also need to have a shot to sit in my seat and do my job. That was not mentioned.
They changed the rules in the middle of the game, right?
Correct. So that's where you lose integrity. That's where you lose the transparency, right? Because everything was a hush hush, because almost anybody who didn't want to go through get the shots or whatever, they were asking their contractor, subcontractor, the federal bosses, hey, what's going on? We don't know. We don't have word. We don't know what's going on. You know, blah 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 blah. And when the day Biden came and put the mandates in, right? It's like, hey, mandates for everybody, federal government workers and contractors. By what was it, November 11th of 21?
The dates kept changing. Like
Something like that.
every day they came out with a new
Right.
deadline, a
So
new
so
threat.
that was like the deadline, So it's like by November, if you don't have your shot, you're out of the job. You're out of the job. They kept doing that. They kept doing that, and nobody was giving us a clear answer. You
Well,
know. Go ahead, Jim.
no. I was going to say that's the contractor piece too. Is one of the things I think we do want to cover in more detail, especially considering the what is it, the FAR, the acquisition FAR, the acquisition rules that were adjusted for all of
Right.
this. Those sort of things I think are important for the American public to understand what occurred and why those rule changes need to have a lot of scrutiny before you start making them just on the fly.
No,
And
absolutely. And look, every contract is different. Every job position is different. Everything requires a certain requirement to do the job, to conduct the work that needs to be conducted. Now, uh, I understand. Like if you travel to a different country or different areas that are known to have harmful disease or whatever, they will guide you through that. Like, hey, you need X, Y, and Z shots to go there because of X, Y, and Z reasons. And if you choose not to get those shots, you're not going to get that position to travel to that area, right? That's your choice. That they will give you a choice to do
I,
that.
and I think it
that's
also depends because there's a common misconception, for example, and it's been cited even within some of the courts, that as State Department employees, you're required to get certain shots, and the reality is disconnected from that. The reality is, um, to the best of my knowledge, there are countries. Every time you go to a new country with the State Department or any other sort of foreign affairs agency, the medical unit will give you a list of these are the vaccinations that we recommend for your destination. Um, and a lot of people take that recommendation list as a requirement list, and the reality is it is not.
that's correct.
And up until this mandate, the COVID mandate, I had the right as a State Department employee to refuse to object to any of those shots for any reason, and I didn't even have to give a justification. I just had to say, thanks, no thanks. I'm not interested in taking that shot.
I'll
Well,
tell
and
you.
And
that's that that
what
was
would happen is they would give you a form and they would say, okay, well, we need you to sign this waiver saying that if you do come down with that thing, let's say it's polio and you're going to a country where polio is still endemic. Okay, if you don't want to take or your family member doesn't want to take the polio vaccine, we're not going to force you to. What we do need you to do is sign this paper saying that if you get polio and only for polio, the State Department or the embassy, whatever agency, will not be required to pay to fly you out for medical treatment. We're not going to medevac you. You're going to be on your own. And that's a risk that you're going to have to assume if you don't want to take that. But never in the history of my employment was I ever told, you have to take this shot or we're not sending you. You have to take this shot or you're fired.
no, and that was
And
consistent across the whole federal government. And however, the one exception to that is where the country itself requires it. So, for example, yellow fever is required if you go to Tanzania. Now, you can refuse it back home, but when you show up at the airport in Tanzania, there is actually a health worker there looking for your, at the time, a yellow card. And if it's not in there, they're saying, hey, come on over here. We've got a yellow fever shot for you. So you have a choice. You can either get it in the United States or you can get it when you show up in country or not go to the country. So I just want to bring this back around. These changes of rules, whether it's FAR or changes in religious accommodations, leads to other administrative actions, not just litigation that we were talking about before. We at Feds for Freedom, we've got, I think it's 16 class action EEOs that we helped organize, and those administrative actions are ongoing. We've helped out with MSPB, the Merit Service Protection Board, employees who are seeking that sort of employer grievance outlet, OIG outreach, and OSC. So, sorry, I just wanted to bring that back in to finish out sort of the litigation piece before moving on to some of the other commentary we'd like to cover this today.
Yeah, and one other thing I want to touch on too, on in terms of accountability, is Jim has highlighted a lot of the lawsuits that we've filed over the past 2 years. Those lawsuits have only been possible through the generous donations and support of our grassroots members. But unfortunately, during that same time period, our organization has been deplatformed, censored, and shadow banned too many times to count. The um, legacy media outlets won't even discuss our organization or lawsuits, and even those who, in theory, would be aligned with our mission. Very often, when they talk about our lawsuits, they speak in very general terms, and they won't cite the case name, which is Feds for Med Freedom v. Biden, or the name of our organization. They'll just say, "Oh, there's a lawsuit out there at the Supreme Court, or there's a lawsuit out there and the Fifth Circuit made this decision." And I don't think any of that's by accident. The reality is that over the past 2 years has been incredibly difficult, um, and a lot of that is at the hands of the government. They've promoted social media companies and other media companies engaging in self censorship or outright censorship to silence dissenting voices. Um, because of all of this, it's been very hard to get our story out and to share and let other federal workers, employees, and contractors and the American people know that there are still people standing up for and fighting for these rights. Our organization has several thousand members across the federal government, but the reality is that our actions save the jobs of hundreds, literally hundreds of thousands of federal employees and contractors, the vast majority of whom don't even know that we exist or that there was a lawsuit that saved their jobs. And so that is one of the goals of this podcast, is to help us get that story out and share it, because we've been censored and deplatformed and shadow banned so many other places. It's crucial for people to know that they're not alone, that they are part of a bigger group, and that group is standing up for and still believes in those fundamental human rights, basic human rights, fundamental constitutional rights, religious freedom, and freedom of speech that our country is founded on.
And Marcus, if I may, to the audience, this is why we are doing this, for you guys to see this and share the message, and spread the word amongst your friends and family and coworkers and colleagues and whoever that's gonna be, who was impacted by this, the mandates, before and afterwards. As Marcus said, we censorship was huge. And a small caveat: we are not doctors. We're not here to give you medical information or guidance on how to treat yourself with any sickness or guide or anything like that. So that's not what we're doing. We are here to basically inform everybody of how the government and the social media platforms, for mostly, they censored almost everything that was not that was going against the mandate. Anything that spoke of the mandates was shadow banned, was blocked, was
We hit
censored.
all the right. We hit all the right algorithms.
I got hit so many times with YouTube strikes, I can't even count anymore. So, but we need, this is you guys's time for calling. Come on in, watch our podcast, spread the word, make sure you share the podcast. Likes and comments help the algorithm for this podcast to go out into the internet world and to be spread. So that's what I have to say, because I've experienced it. Marcus has experienced it. Jim has it. We all have experienced it, because this should have been notified by everybody. Feds for Freedom should have been out there long time ago when they actually filed the first lawsuit against the mandate, but it wasn't. It was not televised. As Marcus said, they censored it
Well,
because
and
they didn't
I
want
think
it to go out. They didn't want it to see. They didn't want us to be the mugshot, basically.
this goes to integrity too.
Oh, of course. This is
There's
this is definitely
lies, and then there's lies of omission, and then there's purposely making sure somebody's voice is fully omitted.
absolutely,
And
absolutely.
we've
And
got
again,
tons of, if anybody who's read the Twitter files or Facebook files knows that there was a concerted effort to shut
we are
down
here to
dissenting
express our
voices.
opinions on this matter. We are here to express the experiences that we've had through up until now. So COVID's coming back, guys. So I don't know. we got round two showing up somewhere.
And
Or
that's the
worse.
thing, Dimas. Like if we don't stand up and fight for what we believe in and fight for these basic rights, um, and reform the government in a way that what we went through doesn't happen again. There's uh, nothing has happened yet that prevents the government from doing everything all over again. Locking down your churches, your places of worship, shutting down your businesses, telling you that you have to stay in your
Well,
house,
Walmart can stay open.
yeah, requiring
Uh,
you to have a vaccine in order to be able to get on a plane or to get to cross a border. Um,
And the
what
pandemic response team has already been talking about harsh quarantines. Do you want to talk about that?
I think that's a good segue into what I was going to cover with the transparency piece and litigation. One of the tools we have to sort of ensure that the government is doing the right thing are FOIAs, and we have a sizable group of volunteers who have given a great deal of time to. I think we've submitted at least 400 FOIAs now. Uh, you know, for a long time, my job had been to collect information, so it seemed like a natural fit. I continued with that job with Feds for Freedom, and I can tell you that the process for that is much more difficult than I expected, but we are starting to see results. And so, um, you know, part of harsh quarantines and some of these things we're hearing, we're submitting FOIAs to confirm some of the things we've heard from members. So, for example, there's been stuff on social media about mask mandates coming back, and right now we've done some informal polling from across the whole of the federal government to see if we're hearing this in other parts of the federal bureaucracies. And so far, it looks like it is tied to sort of an environmental where the case counts, however they want to count that, are showing up. But we're also filing FOIAs to see if there's other data that could support some of the stuff we're seeing showing up in the media. Frankly, mask mandates lead to other mandates. We've seen it. We've seen this already played out before. So sorry,
That's right.
that was such a nice segue. I'll
And the
step back
data
now.
came out. Masks don't work anyways. So
Well, yeah, we've got, even before the Cochrane study or the Dutch study, there were 11 randomized controlled trials that showed that there was probably no benefit whatsoever. The three studies that were left, because early on in 2020, there were 14 randomized controlled trials that were out there. 11 of them said no benefit. One said maybe some benefit, but turns out it was you're talking about. I won't go. Tell you what, we'll save that for another
the next
podcast.
one,
But
yeah, I
but
agree.
that is
I
out
just
there.
have to say I saw a meme this morning that I feel is appropriate, and it was saying, imagine a virus so strong that 4 or 5, 6, however many vaccines people are on now, you have your primary round and then all the boosters that everybody's gotten. But imagine a vaccine so strong, or a virus so strong that 5 vaccines can't stop it, but your Paw Patrol mask can.
Right.
Yes,
But
I
but
saw that
here's
one
the
too.
thing. Here's the thing. Here's where I have the issue with the word vaccine to begin with. I always said this is not a vaccine because vaccine is supposed to be a preventative for a long period of time under the definition of vaccine, right? Why do they call it the flu vaccine? They call it the flu shot because you get it every year. You know, let alone the COVID shot. It's every 6 months you were supposed to get a new one, right? It's like an oil change you have to go in for. So this is not a vaccine. Vaccine is a preventative for a long period of time. At least I want to say what 5 to 10 years.
Well, Dennis,
Even
this is the
attendance,
integrity piece. This is the
right?
integrity
Like
piece.
don't lie, and that's
Facts matter. The truth matters.
I mean, yes, but look, I'm the only immigrant in this podcast, so I'm coming from a country where we had no rights to speak. Whatever the government said, do it. I do as you're told, right? I'm here now, and the rules are different here, and this is why I'm
We'd
here
like to
because
keep them different.
I want to keep it different. I want to be able to speak my mind without getting fired or get canceled, right? And I lost that fear a long time ago. because I know where I stand. I know where we all stand, not just me. Where we want the integrity of the government to remain to that level, right? Not we don't want overreach, and we see a lot of overreach. I have seen a lot of overreach over the years on the umbrella of the government, right? Because they want to control how you live. Now they want to control how you speak. They're doing language control. They're doing health control. That's all part of the movement of, putting everybody under control. Because now, if you say the wrong pronoun, now it's considered what? A harassment. If you say the wrong thing, that's workplace violence. So they use words.
Well, it's like wrong speak right out of 1984.
Right. So they use a
Wrong
word
think.
salad. They use a word salad. They'll try to change it around a little bit just to give it a little strength, and they throw it at you. You know what I mean? So, and this is that this the mandate was a segue to
So
this
on
whole
the,
thing.
you brought up a great point, and Marcus covered it as well. It's definitions matter, language matters, and being accurate is all part of integrity and accountability. You can't hold somebody accountable if the definitions are changing constantly, and so we'll just use the vaccine mandate as an example. They changed the definition of vaccine. In fact, when Moderna and Pfizer filed for with the SEC, the language they used for that filing was the language you use with a gene therapy. And so, a gene therapy requires all sorts of different testing to be considered ready to put out to the public. What we have to do is help educate folks that words matter, and this isn't a vaccine. It's not described as a vaccine. They changed the definition of a vaccine from immunity to something else down the line. So if Americans want to know that their government is functioning properly, they have to know that people within the government are, once again, holding to certain standards. Webster's definition seemed pretty good up until recently. So, or you could take another example, the ICD coding that they use to code for when someone passes away. That all changed. They changed that on March 20th, 2020, and all of a sudden, the statistics for what were normal seasonal rates of death for some of the most common diseases in the United States, like cardiovascular disease, strokes, respiratory disease, they all changed. They all changed. And it was obvious. You could see the graph change on March 20th. That's a lie. So what they did is they lied. And you can't mince words, right, Steph? Go ahead, Steph. Sorry.
The EEOC is another example of changing policies right in the midst of everything. Right before everyone was filing the EEO complaints, they changed their policy on what it meant to be discriminated against, or it was much harder to prove a discrimination without an event happening.
Well, and
I remember,
important.
yeah. But
Go ahead, Steph.
and then we were realizing, talking with everybody, that the EEOC was brought on board to write the policy for the Safer Federal Workforce Task Force. And the collusion between the two and changing the policy as people were trying to send in their complaints, it was incredible.
So who's going to
You're right, there was
challenge
no
it?
truth.
Who's
Go
going to
ahead.
challenge them to put it back the way it was?
It's
Like,
left to
I think it has to come through
More lawsuits.
demand from the American people and pressure, either through lawsuits or through Congress. Those really are our only two options at this time.
Yeah, again, the segue to this whole change was COVID, and this is exactly what they needed to basically do mass control of the entire population. And in order to do that, they needed an event, and the event showed up on a silver platter right after certain things happened that year, and here we are. So they gave him the segue, and now we have to fight back to put everything back to the way it was, where a government should not force you to live your life the way they want you to live your life, right? In United States, the freedom of the entire United States is live your life the way you want to live without anybody forcing you to live the way they want you to live, right? That's the whole point of the United States. That's the whole point of the freedom, right?
We
So
That's the
saw a
whole
lot
message.
we saw a lot of people go against their consciences and go against their beliefs and take the shot because they were afraid of their job, of losing
Absolutely,
their jobs.
absolutely. You should be allowed to think the way you want to think, the way you want to live, as long as you're not harming anybody
so there's
physically.
two
I know
halves to this. There's two
You're gonna
halves.
hurt
There's
people's feelings, but hey, that's not that's not the point. The point is, as long as you're not harming anybody physically, as long as you're not harming anybody, you know, at any point, and you're living your life, that should be it.
there's two halves to this, and there's the half that we're talking about in terms of the goal, our vision. What we want to do is ensure that the American public knows that there are folks within the federal government who respect their values and want to see the values of every American reflected. We fought for the rights of federal government employees because over this last 2 years, because if we're not there in those federal agencies and departments, then when there is a systematic leadership failure from the top to the bottom, there's nobody left. It's done. And so, what we saw happen over the last 2 years is there were a group of folks that, that decided to say no. And, but those are the folks that when push comes to shove, they'll say, well, hold on a second. And I personally believe, it doesn't matter whether it's a COVID mandate or something that they view that's unconstitutional or violates some federal law. It doesn't matter where they stand. They want to ensure that everybody has a voice and our government is reflecting that diverse thought. So hopefully I've tried to sort of illustrate that there's two halves to this. We want to do more for the American people. We had to do a fight for us first. And now I think we're at the stage, Marcus, where I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about some of the stuff that's coming next.
So we saw people go against their beliefs and their consciences, take the shot. They kept their jobs. The likelihood of them standing up for the next thing is actually low. And hopefully in this podcast, if they listen to these federal employees and contractors, citizens who stood up strongly and see what they were thinking, why they thought it, what tools they used to push back and be bold and stand strong, hopefully that will encourage these people to stand up with integrity for the next time.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I finally remembered what I was going to say. I think we would all agree that what we've seen over the last 2 years, this whole thing was an attempted purge of dissenting voices from the ranks of public service. And to some extent it's been successful from their side. I was talking with one of our members yesterday who's in a completely different agency from me, and both of us had a similar experience where we had a list of people within our agency, in my case, the State Department, in their case, another agency, people that they were working with early on, immediately after the mandates, to try to push back. And, both of us earlier this year tried to reach out to that same group of people to encourage them to continue to stay involved. And what we found was that, in my case, among a group of about 60 employees that had been standing with me, nearly 25% of those people, or about 15, were no longer employed with the government. They had either retired, been pushed out, They had resigned and moved on to the private sector. But it should send a chill down the spine of any American to know that there was a group of federal employees who were very harshly attacked on the basis of their religious, for most people, on the basis of what they had held as it was a sincerely held religious belief. It was a deeply held conviction that what they were seeing, what they were going through, what was being proposed was wrong, was immoral, was a violation of their beliefs. Um, and those people were in various ways pushed out of service, and we want to prevent that from becoming worse, because the reality is over the past 2 years it has gotten worse. And we've seen this. Congress is focusing very closely on the weaponization of the federal government, and that is just like the mandates. The weaponization of the federal government is only a symptom, and until we address the root issue, which is a lack of ideological diversity, political diversity um, within the bureaucracy, we're still going to continue to have those issues pop up, and not only come up, but get worse. And so we're going to be playing whack-a-mole until we address that root issue and get back to having a bureaucracy that is reflective of the values of the people it serves and the full diversity of our country.
For all the people out there who aren't federal government employees, I think here's a little test you can do. I think everybody remembers, or everyone who's old enough to remember, September 12th, 2001. If you had asked somebody, hey, are you going to reenlist? Are you going to recommend your son or daughter join the service or work for the federal government? You probably would know that answer deep down. If you run into a federal government employee now or a military service member, go ask them whether or not they intend on staying, or whether they would recommend their son or daughter go serve in the military. I think there's a lot of people out there who this whole period has caused not just distress for the federal government employees, but people who had a view of our government are no longer, not just the health establishment, they're not trustful of any of it. And that's incredibly damaging.
And numbers don't lie. Recruitment numbers have dropped dramatically across military and federal government employees. New recruitments have dropped across the board because now there's no trust. There's no more trust with anything. We've seen it in the news, and the whole purpose of this podcast is the same thing: bring out the fact that how the government lies to cover their track, how the government is overreaching, how the government, everything that has to do with the government, basically.
Can I jump in one more thing, Demis? Just one more thing real quick. Honestly, I think the point you need to know here is that the people who are standing here in Feds for Freedom are people who love their oaths. Okay, we think institution is important. Otherwise, we wouldn't have risked everything to fight back. And so, if you're out there looking at us saying, "Hey, listen, who are these people?" I think the proof is in the pudding. Why would any of us risk all of this? Well, we risk it because we believe those oaths are, they're important. They're important to not just us, because we stood there. Everybody in the federal government, they raised their right hand first day, and they swear an oath to the Constitution. Those matter to people who love institutions, and for better or worse, we love our institutions.
We are the institution, buddy.
Sorry,
if I can if I can just touch on what Demis raised real quick. I was speaking with some military service members a couple of months ago, and I'm not in the military, so I don't know the details, but what they were telling me was exactly what Demis was touching on in terms of recruiting. It's that recruiting and retention within the ranks of the military right now is so terrible. It's at unprecedented lows to such an extent that they actually, what I was told is they are changing the fitness standards again because too many people are being pushed out from the fitness standards, and they're hemorrhaging people so badly, and having such a hard time with recruiting that they need to lower those fitness standards in order to be able to maintain the number of people that they need.
It's the
Do
same
we
thing with
know
the
how
police
they're being
force.
lowered?
And no, I don't know the exact details. I'm
They
sure it's
lowered
at some point in the near future. I'm sure we'll be interviewing
right now.
members
They
of the
lowered
DoD,
about
and
35% of what the requirement is. It's lowered by almost 35% of the required fitness. Uh, fitness requirement has dropped about 35%. Meaning, if you had to do 100 sit-ups, now you got to do 65.
Well,
but again,
about 10,000.
all of these are just symptoms of the underlying issue. The root issue is that the government, the bureaucracy, the military senior ranks in the military aren't reflective of people. The American people don't have the trust in the institutions that we once had. And if we want to survive as a country, we need to rebuild that trust.
Mhm. And
I agree.
Marcus, you brought up a really good point um, one day about how we need to actually encourage our own to join federal service, to be the reform from the inside, and not to run from it, but to go towards it and be the change by being the person with integrity to stand up and hold these people accountable.
Well, I
Yeah,
think
absolutely. And I know we're short on time, so I do want us to make sure we get to this reform piece. But, if you look at the last generation or two, um, certain career fields have been taken over by one side of the political spectrum. And so when you look at like academia, journalism, some, teaching at not even like at the university level, but in the local public schools, um, those are dominated by one side of the political spectrum. And what that has resulted in um, is an erosion of the trust in those institutions because we don't have a healthy, vigorous debate on the various sides of the argument. And it's important for those to have representatives within those fields that do represent, that do speak to, and can come from a point of bringing the other side of the story and talking about why half of America believes the way that it does, because right now those voices are being silenced.
Yep.
in terms of reform, I think that our organization is uniquely positioned. And I'll let other people speak. I always feel like I'm occupying, but we're uniquely positioned. I mean, if you want reform, you got to have people who can actually be there to do the reform process. And this is not meant as some kind of subversive thing. It's meant to be to we talked about the military. I was in the military 10 pounds ago, and I'll tell you, you had an AAR at the end of every training, at the end of everything you've done, an after action review. And, one of the rules was no thin skins, no thin skins. If you screwed up, take ownership, figure out how to do it better, and move on with the next one. We got to get back to that. We got to get back to that. No thin skins. Listen, the American people are expecting us to do better, improve. We're allowed to make mistakes. We can't make too many, and we can't keep making the same ones over and over. So, that, for lack of a better term, that AAR process is huge. And if people can't speak freely within their own agencies and departments about things that they think are wrong, and if they can't do it without being retaliated against, which I'll tell you, we got plenty of stories across the board about that, there's a real problem. There has to be that free dialogue. And that's where reform starts, the dialogue. It starts by having people in the organizations able to actually constructively, I'm not talking about destructive discussion, I'm talking constructive discussion that elevates you know, elevates the argument to a point where people can actually, have these civil disagreements and come to a conclusion that everybody's happy. That's how it's supposed to work. So I don't want to occupy too much. I'm sure there's other people who have comments on reform, but that's sort
I
of the
love
basics for
this.
me.
At one point during I think it was 2020, late 2020, 2021, I was actually we had my mom and I had a script of what we were going to say when we went into the grocery store without a mask. What we were going, and we had it all written out. We talked about we talked about Nuremberg Code that is written into federal code. We had it memorized. That I feel at this point we need to be giving the federal employees tools, American citizens tools to go when they're confronted by people who are pushing these illegal policies. Maybe they don't know they're necessarily illegal, they're just being told to do it, but still we need to have some kind of script to work through to get citizens prepared for what is here already. It's not just coming anymore. We're doing it all over again. It's going to be heavier
Well, Steph,
because the
you're in luck.
government now knows they can't.
We're an organization that provides that sort of educational resource. So, hey, wonderful.
I'm so excited. I'm so excited about our podcast because we get to talk with the workers who were at ground zero in the government and who had these conversations, and we get to hear what tools they used to stand strong and be bold.
As an organization, as federal employees and contractors, we're uniquely positioned to bring reform to the bureaucracy, to the federal workplace. And I think our organization is probably the first time in modern history, if not the first time in our country, that we've had such a large group of thousands of public servants come together and be willing to risk everything, to risk their careers, their reputations, to stand up for what they believe in and to stand up for those fundamental constitutional rights that we have as Americans. And there are lots of groups out there that claim to be federal employees trying to protest or change the government or whatever. The reality is we have the credentials. We have put everything on the line. We have a proven track record of impacting and affecting change for the better, of defending the liberties not only of ourselves but of all Americans. And we intend to build on those successes and to use that group of people that we've brought together to continue to bring positive change to the government, because nobody knows how broken the system is and how to begin to unbreak that better than those of us who are inside it all day, every day, day in and day out, and working within those constraints. And so our goal is, as an organization, to take that experience, that institutional knowledge, and the love that we have for our country, and to work with other stakeholders like Congress, outside organizations, other nonprofits, and other federal employees and contractors that haven't joined us yet, to bring them on board and to stand together, and to do everything that we can within our power to make that change and to make the government more representative of the people it serves. I don't know, if anybody else on the panel has thoughts about reform, but that's kind of where I'm at.
That covers it for me.
Yeah, reform is going to take time. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. So there's a lot of battles to be fought. There's a lot of thoughts and prayers need to be done. And we definitely need encouragement. We definitely need support from everybody to make sure we go back to normal. Normal life. Right now life is not normal for everybody. You know, um, and we need to try to put that back to where it used to be, at least close to it. We're not going to go back to the exact normal that we were, but we can definitely put it back to where it, it's pretty close to what we were.
Reform will never happen if one person does not stand up.
Exactly.
One
Exactly.
person, and then another, and then another. That will be the reform.
Absolutely. And Dimas brought up a good point too. This is not a quick fix. There's no easy button. This is it's the damage that we are seeing today in our institutions has taken generations to come to fruition. It's taken us, decades to get to the point that we're at today, and it's going to take us decades to undo that. But if we don't take concrete steps now to start to address this and to start to change things for the better, then we're going to be in a very bad place just a few years down the road.
Right.
All right. With that, I want to thank our listeners for tuning into this episode. This is just the first of many episodes to come. We're really excited about some of the people that we're going to interview, some of the stories that we're going to bring to you, and we're excited for the opportunity to hear from you. And so, if you're listening to this podcast and you want to share your story, please go to our website, reach out to us, and get in touch with our team. And we're here to tell the stories of our members, of the American people, and to encourage others to stand up for their rights, for their freedom, for their liberty, and for the freedoms of generations to come.
Absolutely. And guys, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Leave your comments down below so we could get this channel up and running as fast as possible.
Tune in next week as we speak with Marcus Thornton, founder of Feds for Freedom. We will be exploring his background that gave him the boldness to hold the line when faced with insurmountable odds.